Good evening. Welcome to the special joint meeting of the Ojai City Council Planning Commission, November 11th, 2014. Roll call.
Councilmember Blatz. Here. Councilmember Clapp. Present. Councilmember Lara.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith.
Here.
Mayor Strobel.
Present.
Commissioner Steve Foster. Commissioner Jagiel.
Here.
Sorry. Commissioner Nicklin.
Yeah.
Commissioner Nolan.
Here.
Commissioner Zabilla.
Here.
And Chair Merck.
Here.
And Commissioner McAdam Lajowski's absent this evening.
Okay, Pledge of Allegiance. And Steve, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is a workshop session. We're going to have a presentation by Sergeant Town Planning. Mr. Clark, would you like to introduce?
Thank you, Mayor and council members and chairman and board members. It occurs to me that in my 30-some years of working with city governments, we've always done planning because someone else was requiring us to do it. It was either because the state wanted us to have a housing element, or the state wanted us to update our general plan, or because a developer came in and proposed a development which resulted in us doing a plan. But it's been very rare in my career where we've done planning because we want to do planning. But that is actually the roots and the essence of what we're talking about tonight. The Planning Commission for many years has been encouraging the city to undertake neighborhood planning. And my understanding of the reason for it, and certainly they can elaborate beyond my understanding, but my understanding is that in going through applications, they found that our zoning code and our other regulations are one size fits all, and that circumstances are different in different neighborhoods depending on when they're developed and what the character of the neighborhood is. So the essence of neighborhood planning is to go out to the neighborhoods and get an understanding from the residents of those neighborhoods as to what they would like the character and framework of their neighborhood to be, and then to work on developing plans that are consistent with that. So we did go through an RFP process. The Planning Commission and the City Council both looked at the RFP. That went out. We had a half dozen very strong proposals. Reviewed all those, and based on that review, are recommending Sergeant Town Planning as the consultant to lead us through this phase of neighborhood planning. So sitting to my right is David Sargent, who I'm very glad to introduce. And he's going to spend a few minutes, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, going over what his approach to this project is, or what his proposed approach to this project is. And then we should have plenty of time for council and board discussion and public input. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob, and thank you very much for inviting me to speak with you. Can we get the presentation up on the screens, please? So I hope this is neither too much or too little detail. I'll try to go through it in, as Rob said, 15 or 20 minutes. And then be looking forward to hearing your questions and talking with you about the possibilities. The team we have brought to you is led by my firm, Sergeant Town Planning. We're a small local firm, well, not local Ojai, but local Ventura. And we've been doing town planning and traditional neighborhood design for the last 20 years or so. Before it was in fashion, and now it's sort of become more in fashion. We bring you a team that includes a number of colleague firms, not really because this first phase one requires a big team, but because we wanted to bring you a team that would be clearly able to handle subsequent phases of planning, whatever you elected to do. We have been working, designing new neighborhoods, some of which are built, a lot of new neighborhoods that are planned. revitalization plans and rebuilding plans for existing neighborhoods that had fallen into decline, and development standards and design guidelines for preserving existing historic neighborhoods. One project we did, a very small project, a pro bono project we did 20 years ago exactly, was actually at the request of Jim Lobel, your mayor at the time. He had heard about the town planning work that we were doing and had asked me if I'd be willing to do on a pro bono basis a one-page summary of what the design and planning of the Ojai Valley ought to be. He was concerned that the county's Ojai Valley area plan was in danger of sort of overwriting a lot of the delicate fabric here with sprawl development, which is pretty much what their codes had in them. So I worked with him over a few weeks to develop a page. I gave you a copy of it before. I could give it to you later, but essentially just identifying a lot of the high-level distinguishing characteristics of Ojai as a real town in a real rural setting. With us is Dwani and Plater Zyberg. They're old friends of ours who were actually working with us locally at the time that Jim asked us to help him with that other bit. They pretty much reinvented the planning profession in the 1980s, reintroducing the ideas of human scale, walkable neighborhoods into the planning lexicon as the antidote to the suburban sprawl that was sort of washing over the country for the last 50 years or so. With us, we also bring Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates. They're our favorite transportation consultants. They are national experts in complete street strategies and transit at all scales. The person who will be working with us on this is Paul Moore, who's the principal of their new LA office, which is going to open in a month, and we're going to be in it sharing facilities with them. Finally, Lisa Wise Consulting is a firm we've worked with Lisa for many years. She specializes in vision-based zoning standards so that the design work that we do with communities can be embedded into the zoning codes to make sure that the most important things are documented in that way. We've just finished with her, actually this was adopted a month ago, an update to Tehachapi's zoning code. I've worked with them over the last almost a decade, first with a vision plan similar to what we're proposing to do here, then helping them update their general plan, and then Lisa and we updated their zoning for them in a hybrid code. I won't go into the details of that. Just to make sure we're on the same page as to what neighborhood planning is, it's at two scales really. It's neighborhood pattern, where we often note the difference between the top pattern, which is a real town with blocks and a mix of housing types in walkable neighborhood settings where you can get to schools and parks and shops easily on your bike or on foot. Safe routes to school are just sort of built in, as opposed to the sprawl patterns, which have sort of single-use projects that are separated by car trips, which is really the antithesis, I think, of what Ojai is about. I mean, not that all of your distances are drivable, but that things should be equalized for pedestrians. So the neighborhood design at the scale of the street is thinking of all of your streets and your parks as the living rooms of your town and of your neighborhood, and that they should all be comfortable, beautiful places where each property has its own unique character. Certainly in Ojai, that's very much the case. There's a lot of variety, and that's the essence of what Ojai is, and the last thing we would suggest is that you sort of clean that up and smooth over the differences. Nonetheless, the streets offer the possibility of the public frontages, or that space between the moving cars and the property line, where you have all different opportunities for pedestrian ways, bicycle lanes, on-street parking, landscape, trees can come into the street. Some of your trees come way into the street, which is one of the most charming things, I think. And then behind the property line, there's a variety of private frontages that provide different degrees of privacy or different degrees of exposure for commercial businesses, and figuring out what range of those types, what front yards with walls, with fences, with just landscape, what range of those possibilities fits in best in your different neighborhoods. Not So that in a nutshell is the emphasis of this phase one work, not to change your zoning, not to write you elaborate design guidelines of any kind, but to figure out what each neighborhood wants to become and what that implies about establishing certain preferred ranges of elements that would participate in making each neighborhood become sort of more itself over time rather than less. And we don't know what that is. That's what we'd need to find out working with you. There's certainly some big opportunities on Ojai Avenue. There's possibilities, it looks to us like, to add perhaps some sort of bike lanes, additional landscaping, additional pedestrian facilities, possibly some landscape median, because you don't need to turn left very often. Anyway, so we think that as the gateway to Ojai is something that would certainly bear looking at. The approach is proposed in 3 phases that I'll go through briefly. The first one is essentially we would observe the conditions of the place as it is, talk with you about how you see it, and come up with a framework, a working framework for discussing Ojai's neighborhoods. Then in the engagement phase, in the second phase, we would have a couple of public workshops, a bunch of walking tours where we'd have a chance to speak with anybody and everybody about what each group thinks about their own neighborhood, some online tools that would let us hear from a broader cross-section of folks. And then in the third phase, we would prepare a framework plan document that would simply organize the information that's developed through this discussion. And oh, sure. I was afraid of getting reverb like Rob did. I didn't want to sound like God or something. Sure. So the third phase would be preparing a document. What kind of document? Well, I'll show you some suggestions of what it might be, but it'll be whatever turns out to be the most useful to communicate what we come up with working together. We'd start with a review of your documents, your general plan, your complete street strategies, your zoning code. We would look very carefully by ourselves and with your help at the rural environments, the older, more rural neighborhoods, the newer, somewhat more suburban neighborhoods, and of course your classic downtown, which is, I think, probably something to not touch very much would be my guess. And just a guess. We find a useful organizing technique to be the transect, which is simply, it's borrowed from the natural sciences. It's a way of looking at a series of environments that flow smoothly together, but thinking of each of them as an immersive environment on its own terms. The left being the wilderness, the second one being the rural environment of which you have an abundance. The middle one being the suburban, sort of lower density housing zone. You have many neighborhoods at lower densities, but with a lot of different forms. And I think that's mainly what we would be looking to find out. And then your town center. The community engagement process would be centered on workshops, of which we've proposed 3. The first 2 would be public workshops wherever it's congenial. The third we're suggesting would be maybe a working planning commission, city council, joint session. It's a possibility, but the formats, of course, are up to you, in which we would share the information we've developed in the first one. In the second one, we'd share a series of design suggestions and strategies and organizing ideas. In the third one, we'd go through the draft document with you and make sure it was about right. We have set up, actually, through our partnership with MindMixer, a little site that offers an opportunity to ask the community a series of questions that can be phrased any way we want, find out what they think is most important overall, ask them to submit photographs of things that they love or don't so much, and map-based tools that let people mark places and then give us a comment or a picture to let us know what they think about that place. It increases the amount of input we're able to receive, and that's all collated in the background of that, of MindMixer, so it's very easy to tabulate. A community outreach toolkit where we would have forms that we would pass out to interested persons who might help us fill in information about what are the most distinguishing characteristics of each neighborhood. The more help we got from interested parties, the more it would leverage what we're able to do in this little first phase. And then the information as it's organized would be fed back in the forms of posters that could be passed, neighborhood groups could take them to review summaries of information. You could put one down in the arcade, you could have one at City Hall. So the deliverables that would come out of this would build up to a plan of neighborhoods. So I've just taken a quick shot at this. That's the way your neighborhoods are mapped now. And one of the things mentioned at the RFP was that you're not completely sure that that's necessarily the magic structure. And so we just took a quick look at so we often find that quite a few of the neighborhoods are generally of a more rural character without sidewalks and with smaller buildings on larger lots. Then, of course, you've got your main open spaces are the golf courses and the schools. Then you've got the blue ones show up. Those are the in-town older neighborhoods that are very highly connected to the downtown. Then you've got the suburban neighborhoods that surround that. And then you've got your downtown district. And we think often the discipline of thinking about how far a person walks is a good way to think about town. So that's another layer to consider as we think about updating your conception of what's a neighborhood. Ultimately, those decisions are yours, obviously. You already, I'm sure, have maps of neighborhoods in your mind that may not be the same as those colored ones. So we'd come up with composite ways of thinking about what's a neighborhood. But often, the areas within which one can sort of walk around and get places comfortably ends up being a useful overlay to help you think about consolidating or adjusting boundaries of neighborhoods. And then to think carefully in each place about the specific the key elements of neighborhood character in that place, the key elements of the town center character, the key elements of rural environments, the key elements of, you've got some little passages that are quite beautiful along of the old sort of California highway character. That inn is a prime example, I think, of that. And place opportunities, maybe highlight some opportunities for sprawl repair. I mean, you gave up as many on-street parking spaces as you got in that parking lot off the street, and you could have a bigger dining terrace at a place like that. So with all the focus on frontages and the public realm, really, because each property is owned by somebody. The town is the spaces in between everybody's properties. And with the exception of a few beautiful parks, that's mostly gosh, I'll stop doing that. See, it's his fault. It's his fault. It's your streets. But we will not forget about the building patterns. We will look carefully at the range of architectural character and scale from the downtown to the neighborhoods and to many things in between. And we'll compile those into a master table that will start to account for sort of neighborhood. So imagine each of those pictures across the top is a type of neighborhood. So coming down the column from the neighborhood, you would have descriptions of the sorts of elements that are most characteristic of public and private frontages in that kind of neighborhood environment. And we would have include information about building scale and character and use to some extent. We would look at that at a high level in this first phase as a context for thinking about the whole the whole neighborhood. And we would also think at a high level about street and public space types, and those might be topics of future, more in-depth work in future phases of neighborhood planning, if that turned out at the end of this to seem like something that was valuable to you. We would compare that matrix against your existing zoning, which we'll analyze carefully in phase one, in the initial analysis. And the kind of document that we would expect to produce would be similar to what we did for the city of Tehachapi, starting when they hired us the same night they slapped a one-year moratorium on development back in 2006. when they saw that their town was about to just disappear into a sea of new housing tracts. And so we worked rapidly with them over the course of that year to prepare what we called an interim community design program, which was a vision plan that identified the character. They saw themselves as a small mountain town. And basically the whole general plan update we did, everything came out of small mountain town. And so this was a interim document that provided information, that organized, I can't point with this, but it organized information about the way frontages are made, information about the way streets are made, information about the scale and character of buildings into a transect-based framework, which was then embedded into their general plan update when we did that a couple years later, and then was embedded into their zoning code update, which we just finished. And for this work, we would be focusing, as the RFP requested, on frontage conditions. What kinds of walls, fences, what kinds of street edges are most congenial for pedestrian and bicycle traffic, and to equalize things with the cars. So we would zoom in and focus on, you have so many very cool frontages of that wouldn't be found in most towns. You know, pervious sidewalks, carefully thought through landscape, trees in the street, thank goodness. I'm so glad they're still there. And we'd come up with a kit of parts for public frontages that would characterize the combinations found in each type of neighborhood. This is for a different context, obviously, but it's the type of document we make. We'd look very carefully at the private frontage types and find out what range of these possibilities makes the most sense in each of the neighborhoods, and then document that similarly in some guidelines for private frontage types. We would work with Paul Moore's help and with your Complete Streets Committee's help, which we would hope to collaborate closely with them and with your Planning Commission, and we'd like you to work as hard as you want to work on this with us, to think about ways that some targeted improvements might be identified for particular streets. This is some work we did for, it's pretty simple, school district, school crossing, and help people see that some fairly simple improvements could make a significant difference. We would probably want to you would probably want to prioritize such interventions for places that help support transit. I mean, as rural, as low density as your place is, there's some good transit service, the trolley and other services. I think you could start growing some of these initiatives out from places that also support transit and as well as pedestrians and bikes. And we would prepare for you what we would customize for you, what we call a Complete Streets Kit of Parts, which is a sort of an organized way of thinking about pedestrian facilities, bicycle facilities, landscape, and on-street parking, and using all those elements to balance the way your public spaces are made. And then as a future phase, we could get into more detailed considerations of street typologies and possible updates to your street standards, and might in the future, this information would in a very organized way in the future inform adjustments to your zoning code if you decided that was warranted. We've heard that it seems sort of like a one-size-fits-all, and we would certainly agree that you have a delicate, complex variety of types of places, and one zoning code tends to sort of smooth all that off. It sort of knocks off the high spots and fills in the valleys. And that might be worth considering adjusting it. That's all, and I would like to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from council or planning commissioners?
I have a question, if I may. We have the different neighborhoods,
Yep.
Golden West and say the Arbolada.
Yes.
When you do the public charrettes, are you going to have them together or apart? Because people can have different views about their neighborhoods. So how would you handle that situation?
We'd try, well, we'd probably try to do both. I think there's value, well, that would be one of the many things that we would propose to work out with you folks in an initial mapping out the work, because our goal is to do this in whatever way is the most useful. We know a fair amount about the community, but not enough yet. So we would suggest at a minimum some walking tours in specific neighborhoods to look firsthand, biking, horseback riding. I don't have a horse, but if somebody has an extra horse, I can ride. To look at those individual places. We've budgeted to do that in that first phase of sort of exploratory work before the workshops. We've planned to be up here for pretty much full day workshops. We'd suggest Saturdays so people aren't rushed, and we could have a basic meeting in a venue that makes sense geographically and in terms of, its accommodations. And then we could jet out to look at specific places. This first phase has a modest budget, but we're willing, we've structured our proposal to help you stretch that, including the fact that because I live so close, I just come up here for a couple tours of that kind, just, because I can.
You live in Ventura?
Yes.
Okay.
Our office is in LA, but
Yeah.
I take the train. So, yeah, I still live in Ventura.
To get the train, you have to go quite a distance.
Oh, to Montalvo?
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
One of the biggest impediments I see to incorporating bike lanes and pedestrian
Mhm.
pathways into our community is that it's an older community that's
Mhm.
built around Model Ts, I suspect, so we have very
Mhm.
narrow streets.
They are, which is great.
It's great, but it also is an impediment to incorporating bike paths, et cetera, and I was wondering whether you've worked with a community like that in the past?
Oh, yes.
Or whether you've found solutions for it, because that to
Well-
me is one of the biggest struggles we have.
Normally in a town environment, on the small streets like that, if they're detailed carefully, they generally cause vehicular traffic to move reasonably slowly to the point where bicyclists and cars can pretty much mix comfortably. It's usually on the wider streets that are 40 feet curb to curb and wider, like the county's standards, where cars drive too fast, and then you really need to mark where they stay and where the bicyclists stay. So I think I would expect it's going to be like the rest of your community. It's going to be a fairly complicated mix. There's not going to be any one-size-fits-all bike facility. It's going to be a matter of sort of street by street. If maybe you can neck down, maybe you can do little bulbs at intersections in some of the streets to start to slow the cars down. You've got a few now where you've got planters that are lined with cobbles that have a tree at a corner. There's several I've seen. So that kind of thing, to just get the cars to slow down to where the bikes don't feel threatened. And then on a few of the streets, you'll probably be able to squeeze in a bike lane, maybe squeeze the travel lanes for the cars down, which will slow them even more.
So I have a couple of other questions within that. There's some new standards that have come down from the federal government.
Yep.
So, okay, and the other thing
Well,
is,
yeah, actually, Nelson Nygaard wrote a lot of those.
did he?
Yes.
So one of the other things is resistance to change.
What?
Yeah, what a concept.
You're kidding.
I thrive on.
No, we were I'm sorry.
Yeah, you never
Wait,
come
yeah.
up against that. I thrive on change, but there is a tremendous resistance to change, particularly in traffic calming.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what you just told me sounds like you're saying that one of the ways to deal with the bike situation in narrow streets is through traffic calming
Yeah,
measures.
sure.
So my question to you is, do you have some strategies or a workbook that you could provide to us to
course.
help try to reduce the resistance that we might get for those kinds of new ideas?
And one of the things we were thinking of in one of the workshops is that, and it depends if you and your staff are up for it. We've done tactical exercises before, where if you pick a particular spot, you can put up a temporary traffic calming thing with cones or stones or plants, and just try one out. Because I think people are afraid of change more when they can't quite visualize what it is. So we make those kinds of illustrations. I showed the photo transformations to help you see that, oh, that's all it is. But we could actually set one up and let people try it out.
Madam Mayor, I appreciate you coming and giving this presentation. It
Sure.
really helps a lot.
Good.
A follow-up question, are you familiar that Ojai Avenue, that's Caltrans?
Yep.
So
That's the main reason we have Nelson Nygaard on the team, because they're engineers and we're not.
So how well have you worked in the past with Caltrans?
They've worked with Caltrans very, very well.
And
Well, I
mitigating.
work with, they're my buffer between me and Caltrans. But they're able to, Caltrans is actually coming around, or Caltrans is trying to come around. It's goes against their nature, but they're trying very hard. So they have adopted a set of context-sensitive design standards and guidelines for streets, where they're willing to consider alternative lane widths. They're willing to. They understand that pedestrian and bicycle safety. I mean, Caltrans has always understood that safety is an issue, but their strategy has usually been to just make sure there aren't any pedestrians, because then nobody can hit them. But they're realizing that when they come into a town, that's not the same as when they're out in the flats, out in the straightaways. So we understand we understand very. I'm not telling you that we can work magic, but we and Nelson Nygaard can get them comfortable with.
Because there are some pockets on Ojai Avenue where I've seen almost pedestrians get hit.
Yeah.
And
Well,
many times.
Well, you come
multiple
around
times.
that. You come around that corner into the straight toward the arcade, and you're coming down a little, rise past the market there, and you're turning right, and it's wide. And the thing about roads is, if it looks like a highway, people drive like it's a highway. And Caltrans at least philosophically understands that now, and then it's just sort of the luck of who you get. But we're down there right by District 7, and I think we can have some good conversations with them.
And I have a question on your first part of your application, how you're proposing to get community involvement.
Yes.
How well in the past have you gone to community participate in some of your initial meetings? And depending.
It depends on, we always figure, I had some slides on that, but I took them out because I didn't want to go on and on. The most important thing in our experience is connecting to local networks of communication. So I think putting out notices through some of the websites that people go to all the time, and putting posters up down in the arcade, and putting posters up in some of the other markets that people shop at all the time, and then advertising on the local radio, and I think putting flyers up in a town this size probably helps a lot. So the city staff has offered to pitch in and work with us on a strategy for that, and some of the legwork to get the information out. So yeah, we're very successful at that. We work in big cities and in a lot of small towns, and you just got to figure out who talks to who and then get the word out. We worked a lot in Lancaster. We had very successful outreach up there with going through the local churches. A couple of the churches offered to host a workshop, and yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Food helps too. If you can offer food at the meeting. That got the biggest turnout we ever got was in Paso Robles, where we had a lot of. I'm sorry. No, no. It was only barbecue, unfortunately. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I thank you very much for this. A number of years ago, there was an idea, and I thought probably I had it. I grew up without a car in New York City, so I'm exceptional. But it seems to me we have Grand Avenue, which could be easily turned into one way from the east to the west. We have Matilaha or Aliso Street, better yet, which could become west to east. That would give plenty of room, especially if we eliminated parking and just had parking on one side, to create either pedestrian-friendly and bicycle-friendly lanes. It's something the city does not need Caltrans involved in. Those are our streets.
Right.
But there was a lot of community resistance on Grand Avenue, which in the average day, and I've counted, there's a zillion parking spots. But people's, what shall I say, attachment to being able to park right in front of their house is truly amazing. What strategies would you have to overcome that type of resistance to change, besides, you know?
Well, I think we would suggest that there's two steps. There's identifying high priority streets, as you have, and then there's looking at a series of options for how to make them more walkable, more bikeable, safer. And I think we would propose to draw, 3 or 4 or 5 alternatives and sort of list what we see as the pros and cons and just put them up on the wall in a public meeting, and usually the cream rises in those situations. The one caution we often mention about making streets one way is that counterintuitively, it makes people drive faster, because the safer it feels, the more people leave their foot down. And conversely, the more iffy an intersection looks as you approach, the more people tap the brake and slow down. So sometime in some interesting cases that have been well publicized, there have been very complicated intersections where they kept adding more and more traffic signals, and finally the solution was just take them all out. And just all of a sudden people pay attention and figure it out. So that's the long way of saying that one way might or might not be a solution there, but I think the elements of the considerations you mentioned are absolutely the things to consider, and there's a bunch of different ways to combine them, and we would draw them and see what people think is best.
Any other questions?
Yes.
I don't have a question, but I do have several comments. Thank you for your presentation. I wanted to say you have a stellar team that you're presenting to work with you, which is very impressive and could be a wonderful thing for Ojai. And then I also wanted to introduce myself. I am a planning commissioner, but I'm also the chair of the Complete Streets Subcommittee.
Good.
So,
I've been wanting to meet you folks.
Okay. And several of the other commissioners here are on that, and also members of the public who happen to be sitting here in the audience, a couple of people I see. But anyway, what I wanted to say was we've done a lot of work with Caltrans, so we've established a relationship with them to a degree.
Right.
And we've done walkability index data collecting.
Yes.
So all of that
would feed into this.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to share a lot of what we've done. And we've also been really actively working with our public works director.
I know.
And doing projects where we've gone out and trying to do complete streets applications, even though we don't have a complete streets implementation plan yet, which we'd love to have. And what you were presenting is the preliminary stage.
Yeah, it would be sneaking up on
exactly
that. It would be identifying a lot of the kit of parts.
Exactly.
That one would employ in this town to achieve those functional results, with also certain aesthetic results that fit in.
So I'm really excited about this, and
so are we.
I hope it works, that you'll be able to help us. Thank you.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Madam Mayor, you have one more question. I know the public probably wants to ask questions too. On one of your partners, they talk about smart code.
Yes.
Could you explain what that is?
Oh, okay. That is a vision-based or form-based code that is a way of merging the information that you already have in your zoning code, probably adjusted to differentiate standards for neighborhood A and neighborhood B and neighborhood C, since we've heard that the current code tends to make them too much the same. And then at the same time to coordinate the basic zoning standards with the sorts of frontage design information that we would propose to develop in this work. So it's a standard format that may or may not be, my guess is maybe not right for Ojai. I think it may be a little too buttoned down for you, but it's also completely customizable, so that it's essentially a framework within which one can say what needs to be said about the size of buildings, the amounts of setbacks, the scale and form of the building, as well as considerations of how the frontages are designed, considerations of how the streets are designed. So it's just a format, one of many formats for organizing all of these subjects that we're talking about. Yeah.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to say I'm really excited to have you guys working on this. I think we're really lucky to have you guys in this position. I agree with Kathy. You guys are just amazing. So I'm thrilled.
Thanks.
I'm the chair of the Planning Commission, and,
Yes.
and our hope as a planner is out of this is that we will, at the end of this process, have a revised zoning code that really matches the way we think things ought to be. So I'm looking forward to that and working with you.
Well,
And I was really excited what you said about Tehachapi, about
Yeah.
coming down to a small mountain town.
Yeah.
It would be wonderful if we could end up with something like that for Ojai.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things we've talked about for years, is we need some kind of touchstone phrase like that we can compare everything to and say, oh yes, this is, or it isn't.
It's sort of amazing how much mileage we got out of those three little words. I mean, we didn't come up with it. I mean, they came up with it, and we just sort of helped boil it down. But
Yeah.
Real quickly, yeah, it sounds like you have a sense of what our community's about. And when I mentioned changed earlier,
start.
It is, yeah, we think we're special.
yeah,
But one of the things I think that's really an overall kind of overarching feeling in this community, and one of the reasons there's a fear of change,
yeah.
is that they're afraid that change is going to become urbanized.
What right?
And I think that's one of the things that's most important about anything we do, is that we make sure that we preserve that, but at the same time improve on what we have, rather than turn it into that cookie-cutter urban planning kind of concept.
Right.
And that's going to be a delicate balance, but I think if we can help project that that is our intention, which I'm making an assumption that everyone agrees with me, that is our intention is to preserve that, but at the same time make it better,
Right.
rather than urbanize it in so doing, and maybe reduce some of that resistance that we get towards what the famous bulb outs, or narrowing a street somewhere, or changing parking someplace. If there's a really
Boy,
overall
parking is the third rail.
understanding, if there's an overall understanding that ultimately after everyone adjusts to the changes, they'll realize that we haven't destroyed the community, but we've actually made it better through these changes. Sounds to me like you have an idea about what that's about, so I'm real excited about.
Yeah, I think our former client, the former community development director of Paso Robles, finally, after we were talking about, okay, what do they really want? Says, well, they want change without change. And I thought, okay, got it. So, I mean, and there's another thing that Chris Alexander, a famous urban theorist, said, that each increment of building should be done in such a way as to heal the city.
It's like a good
So,
haircut.
Yeah,
If
right.
you go in and get your haircut and nobody can tell,
Right.
it's a good haircut.
There you go. Right.
We need a good haircut.
You need a good haircut.
Right.
Paul? Okay. And I'm going to quickly apologize to Chester for calling you Steve earlier. I knew better, but I just thought I'd let you know that I did know that. We're going to listen to the public now. It's about 13 minutes until 7. I don't think we want to do the 3-minute thing. I know certain members have probably several questions, so if you want to come on up, go to the podium. Come on up, Bill. You were the one I had in mind.
I have a couple of questions. I'm beginning to understand something about form-based planning, and I printed out the Wikipedia section, and it lists the planning firm that you have from Florida. Lucini, was it? What's the name of it?
Duane played
Yeah, they're on
DPZ.
page,
We
they're
call
on
them
page
DPZ.
4 in here. So
Right, yeah.
very credible. Okay.
Yeah, they are.
And I can see a lot of value
Yeah.
for what I've been listening to. And we had a real dust up on the North Signal Street, which is parallel to Gridley. You mentioned Gridley in your report as being a really nice rural street. Well,
It
we
is.
used to have that on Signal.
Yeah.
And maybe if we had your planning, we wouldn't have what we have today in 6-foot walls. Okay. But throughout your written presentation that I read on the website, it refers to working with staff. And staff will help develop this and implement this and such. In my opinion, we don't have time now to do the things that the staff in the community development department is supposed to do. And I heard that we just lost the planner last week. So we have one person. And it seems that, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the $50,000 contract, which you talked about being kind of underpriced,
Well,
which is good.
no,
You know, you said that.
It's
you know, that
thrifty.
You're not going to charge for
it's
the
thrifty.
Yeah, okay. May generate $150,000 worth of work in our planning department.
Oh, no, we're not going to dump stuff off on them. We were just, by saying that, we were wanting to simply emphasize that we weren't just going to go off and do our thing. We were going to stay in close touch with you all, and if you all turns out to be maybe an ad hoc committee of some of your planning commissioners and other people, that'd be fantastic. That's what we normally hope for.
Okay. Well, that's my concern.
Yes.
Next question would be, there are apparently several sections that will ultimately get us to the goal of having a better community that's connected and form regulated and such. What's the price of the next two sections?
It
Is
depends
it more
on
than 50,000?
Oh yeah. It depends on what you want to do. See, we're not presupposing. You may just want to go in and adjust some numbers in your zoning. You may want to do a little zoning overlay for 3 or 4 places that say, well, you know, where it says X in the zoning code, we mean X minus 2 or X plus 3 in this, you know. So it could be very simple, or it could be sort of an overhaul. We'd know more after we diagnose your existing regulations in that first blast of work, and we'd know a whole lot more after we hear from you all how far off you think they are.
Could you tell us approximately how much the Santa Paula City spent in the work with you?
Well, we didn't work for the city of Santa Paula. We worked for the Luminera Company.
But I saw in your
In the
document
East Area
that
1 document?
You had pictures of the Santa Paula downtown? Did I see that?
No, that was Ventura downtown. Yep. No, really.
Santa Paula's in there.
Oh. Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah, the gateway, yeah, yes. That's for, our client in that case is the Luminera Company that owns that land.
Let me ask you another quick question.
Oh, and that was a lot of money, because we've done like 3 or 4 different versions over the last 8 years. You don't want to know how much that cost.
My wife and I just came down from Palo Alto. We stopped in Soledad, and we've seen the city fronts that you did there. How much did that cost the city of Soledad?
Not very much.
Okay, well, that sounds good.
Okay, and actually Lisa Wise and we worked on that.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay.
They got a really good deal on that.
2 more points.
Yeah.
When the plan gets developed and such, what kind of costs occur or are placed on homeowners in order to meet the municipal regulations that have been adopted?
You mean, would permit fees go up, or would there be some general assessment?
As the codes change for form-based planning and develop the criterias and the qualities and such, do people have to spend money when they apply for a building permit for maybe putting a new roof on in order to bring their facade up?
I don't know. How do you guys finance planning costs? Different ways, I guess, right?
Well,
I don't think that's his question. I think his question is, if somebody wants to put a new roof on,
Mm-hmm.
do they then have to bring everything else into compliance that might be
Oh.
landscaping to?
Oh, no.
Okay.
Was that the question?
Yeah, that was the question.
Oh, yeah. Well, the main answer is it would be,
Paul's pretty smart.
the main answer is it would be however you all want it to be. But normally if somebody wants to add a bathroom to their house, they don't have to remodel all the bathrooms in the house. They just put in a new bathroom. So that would be something that would be covered in the administrative section of your zoning code, and we never suggest linking those things.
No relationship.
Not really, no.
Last thing.
Good questions.
The first statement in Wikipedia says, a form-based code is a means of regulating development to achieve a specific urban form.
Or rural.
It doesn't say that.
I know.
Okay, but you're back.
They mean it.
Okay, all right. Form-based codes create predictable public realm by controlling physical form primarily and with a lesser focus on land use through
Yep.
municipal regulations.
Yep.
You agree with that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I've got more slides I could have showed you, but there's a spectrum of considerations from sort of the basic land use and the gross, how big is your house? And then there's a bunch of things about what sort of shapes your house takes. Is the massing done somehow so that instead of looking like one big box, it looks like three little boxes hooked together? Those sorts of things. And then there's down to what kind of roof tile you have. Well, there's a whole spectrum there from standards to guidelines. And the way you can think about it is that every city can set the slider. There's a slider that goes back and forth here, so you can have almost all of that can be standards, and just a little bit over here is guidelines, or you can slide it way back over here, so that only the stuff that you just really would die if you got it wrong is standards, and then all of this over here is guidelines. It's very flexible.
Okay. So,
And we know as much about that as anybody. I've been doing them for 20 years.
Okay,
And everybody else has been doing them
I
for
did forget
a
to
year and a
introduce
half.
myself and put it on the tape. Bill Miley, North Signal Street. Okay. My concerns are
Yeah.
I don't want any more municipal regulations
Okay.
that control people's physical, built, and personal lives in the city.
Okay.
And I do not want our city to look like Soledad or Santa Paula. I want it
course
to look
not.
like, or Ventura
Yeah. But,
or Oxnard.
right.
And I'm also concerned, I don't want the planning department overwhelmed by neighborhood planning because my goal and my priority is affordable housing with a lot of other people. And a couple of months ago, from the planning department, it said that when this council was talking about priorities, there was a brief discussion about if we're going to do neighborhood planning, we're going to have to put affordable housing lower down the priority list. That's what I heard, and I may be wrong. And I don't want that. So, thanks.
And just to the group, one thing. So a lot of the work we do, and most of the work we do is working with communities to help them envision what they want to become over time. One of the tools we use is form-based codes. We use them, and we use them sometimes. We don't always use them. Sometimes we just adjust the zoning and do design guidelines. And there's a complete spectrum of mixing and matching across that, and we have no idea what would be the appropriate response here till we find out what people think about how to accomplish this change without change. So until you know what you're trying to do, you don't know what tool to use.
Mayor Pro Tem Smith?
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. Two things. We have not built any affordable housing in 12 years. It's disgraceful. It does not mean that affordable housing has to be 3 stories and have to be out of context with the neighborhoods. In fact, there was a workshop from People's Self-Help Housing, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which was very, very good. I'm retiring from council, but I'm sure hoping we do build some things and we can spread them out in the various lots that the city owns. The other thing I want to emphasize to you very much is that I think in my first campaign to run for city council, which would have been 12 years ago, I said that Ojai is the last best place. And I truly mean that, and we want to keep it that way.
I agree with you.
Thank you.
I would love to help.
Mr. Daddy?
Good evening, Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, Council, and planners. I am with Complete Streets. I've been with Kathy since the very first meeting. This is something she and I have talked about for years. Having come upon the forestation tool, and it looked like this would be a good footprint to start with. And so it's something we've discussed forever. And everybody's going to throw in their wish list, and I'm going to throw in mine. I wish we would go back and take a look and find out why we kind of got halfway through our matrix and stopped. So when you drive down Ojai Avenue, I want you to tell me why, when the street width is the same width from the Y all the way out to Bacali's, to the fire department, it does neck down. Why we can park on a lot of Ojai Avenue, and all of a sudden it's unsafe and we can't park, and then we get into the speed areas. We get into the pedestrian areas, we get into the traffic areas, we get into the bicycle collision areas, and so my main goal for you is to choke this thing down. You know, people are going to complain. I really don't care. If you're in a hurry, live somewhere else, because this isn't the place to speed. We have people speeding all the way through.
You don't want to be in town, don't be in town.
Well, I'm just saying that we need to have the pedestrians and the kids with bikes and the bike riders and the moms with strollers not to have to go out in the street anymore and dodge cars. You know, we have too much of that. We've had a number of fatalities on Ojai Avenue. And so that is something that I really think needs to stop. The circulation is good. I would hope that you would take a look at Encinitas and some more of these other communities that are progressive. And one of the things we can do is we can eliminate.
Their bike trails are beautiful.
Well, not only that, but they've got the traffic rings. They've got the circulation effort, so we stop and start and stop. We can go faster by going through the little roundabouts than we can by having all of these stop signs.
Absolutely.
And all of these stop signs for triangles that Kathy and I and Complete Streets have looked at, we can do some circulation changes within the Arbolada and other areas. We can make Grand Avenue safer. It's just too fast. We did bicycle demonstrations where we had kids. We locked it off. We stopped parking. We had all these kids. They all drove their bikes for a couple of days to school. And as soon as the barricades went down, all the mothers pulled their kids off the street and said, it's too dangerous, we're not going to let you out here anymore. And so we have some things that I'm hoping you'll really focus on. The other thing I hope you'll focus on, CUPs, we need a lot less of them. And when we have to do design review, I hope we don't add any more design review to this, because that's going to be a deal breaker in my opinion. People are not going to want to chunk up $1,000 just to have somebody give an opinion on what they're going to do.
Sometimes if there's some clearer guidance on what types of things the community has agreed ahead of time are wanted neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood, sometimes that can something like a fence or whatever can start to be an administrative procedure. That's how our clients in Kansas have handled it.
Okay, well, we'll look to you to guide us with that, but I'll tell you, that's going to be a deal breaker. People got to spend $1,000 to get a design review to put up a small fence on that. It would be a waste of money to go any further if that's how it's going.
A lot of that can become administrative if you're clear.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the, Dale? Remember to give us your name for the home viewing audience.
Yes, I'm Dale Hansen. I live in the city of Ojai. And you kind of answered this question a little bit, but I'm not real clear. Suppose I own a house in a neighborhood that's been well-defined, but my house is kind of different than everyone else's. They're going to make me a bad guy, or what happens?
No, I would. Well, I suppose I'd have to just throw in a tiny little asterisk that means like different in what way, but assuming that it's different in design, quality, and character, I think that's what makes real towns real towns. I mean, the last thing in the world we would suggest is that you like come up with style guidelines. It's like,
Okay, so,
no, I don't think, doesn't look to me like it. I mean, maybe across from the arcade, you want to limit the kinds of things that might fit in the neighborhoods. I would say the things that would probably strike folks as inappropriate is if the house was just a very different size and scale. If all the other houses are made out of pieces
yeah, that's
this
sort of what I
big,
mean.
and then somebody comes in with a piece that's like this big.
Yeah.
You can have a bigger house, but if it's made out of pieces that look sort of like the other houses, but in
Okay.
terms of style or something, no, I think the more variety, the better.
Okay, thank you.
I would hope. I mean, and again, this is up to you, not me, but that's my initial impression.
Anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Mr. Quillisi? And give us your name for the viewers at home.
Thank you, Mayor. Steve Quillisi, West Eucalyptus Street. I had one sort of high-level question and one low-level, if you will. On the high level, I think everybody agrees that one size fits all for the entire city doesn't work because we've got some lots that are 10 times the size of others or more of a scale than that. But I'm wondering if you pick, let's say, Drown and Fulton and Park and Shady Lane, these are all nearly mile-long streets with very few cross streets, lots of small houses. Are you going to tell everybody in those neighborhoods that they all have to abide by the same set of guidelines or standards or whatever you call them? And does that mean that people can't make bigger houses, or they can't get 2 lots and make a bigger house or stuff like that? So that's a general high-level question. Second, you mentioned all these, low-level question. You mentioned all these workshops are going to be full-day workshops, and I'm looking at your proposed schedule and professional fees here, and I see that the Workshop 1 has 4 hours of you, I presume you're the sergeant principal, and 4 hours of someone from Nelson Nygaard. And then the other 2 workshops are 4 or 6 hours per person. So I'm wondering, have you changed the proposal, or what are we talking about? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. We normally budget about a half day of time for those kinds of workshops. We often have, we can go longer, but often the community gets tired after about 4 hours, so we put them in there at 4-hour length. But if it goes 6 or 7, we're not looking to get paid another 2-3 hours. I think we budget them at what we think it takes to do a good workshop, and if it goes 3 hours or if it goes 6 hours, we really don't care.
Did you want to answer the question about Drown Street? Whether you would have a cookie.
Mr.
Oh,
Timmer
well,
might?
it depends.
Just a moment.
That ends up being that's what you find out in those first 2 phases of work. It's mapping the things out in terms of their existing physical form and in terms of the degree and nature of change that the people who live there hope for or anticipate. So I think the simple answer is there's very likely a bunch of those long streets where the same basic guidelines probably make sense, and there's probably some that we could do them street by street. You can break it down as fine as you need to. It could turn out that there's some particular street that has very particular characteristics that, well, they sort of did to me too. That's why I drew them all one color. But if there's some particular street that has a unique characteristic that you want to make sure you don't overwrite with something else, then you make that specific.
And
Sir.
Madam Mayor, real
Oh, I'm
quickly,
sorry.
I know that we have to move on to the other meeting, but
Yeah.
just real quickly, one of the things I've heard from the public is a concern about the division between you and the community. Where does your authority begin and end? And I think what I'm hearing is there's a concern that you're going to come in and you're going to say that this is what you need to do to make your community work. And it sounds to me like you're
That would be
saying
suicide.
quite the opposite.
Yeah.
That you're saying you're going to be guided by the community and the needs of the community, and then you'll help us facilitate
Yeah,
that.
and right. So ultimately towns are systems. Ultimately, towns are You've got land use regulations, you've got street standards, you've got a circulation network. So you need to look at it systematically. And so it's our job to take all the ideas and preferences and values and priorities that you have and sort of organize them into something that can work. So that you don't have so much detail in it that everybody's eyes glaze over, but you don't miss what's most important either. That's what we do.
Patrick, would you give us your name for the?
Yes, good evening. My name is Patrick Tumamite. I'm a resident of the Ojai Valley. I'm here tonight to thank the group of Signal Street for backing me on the archaeological study that's being done at 1105. I appreciate their efforts and their help and anyone else that's concerned. It's a great concern of mine. But I do see some changes that need to be made within the city ordinances. The property was exempt, and there's been other incidents where exemption falls under single-story dwellings. One is Saddle Lane. Turns out that they destroyed an archaeological site there during that process. And then you have some building that went on just down the street right here, within an eighth of a mile of known archaeological site, which is the police station. That was a two-story building, and there was no archaeological study being done there or anything done about that. So, I mean, there's some changes that need to be done, and I'm just wondering if you have environmentally a workshop that covers cultural resources within the Ojai Valley.
Not in the current scope, we don't.
Okay.
That would be a consideration that would obviously be an important layer of information to take into account if you look at adjusting things in your zoning or zoning code or general plan. That's just another layer of the mapping. The sort of the layers of mapping that we're looking at here have more to do with physical design, particularly focused on the way the public spaces are made. Mm-hmm. And then in a future phase, you might consider more of the private development, which I think would be more tightly linked to the cultural resources concerns that you're expressing.
Yes, and there's a lot that covers the historical part of Ojai, which is great. It's beautiful. I like the way it is, the old town feeling.
Yeah.
I grew up here, and I've seen a lot of changes since 1964, when we first moved from Miners Oaks to town, and there's been a lot of changes, and so I miss the old feeling. Used to walk the street at 5 or 6 o'clock, and there would absolutely no vehicles.
Well, change is going to keep happening, and the question is, how are you going to shape it?
That's what I'm afraid of.
Really,
this town is getting very populated very fast, and there's going to be a lot. There's not to be not too much land left, and it's just going to increase in population. So I'd like to see the town stay small.
Patrick, we don't have to wait for this particular project to be done for us to look at these architectural or archaeological resources that we're finding that may be disturbed by a dwelling that could get an exemption from, and that would be entitled to a director's exemption because we wouldn't even know they were there. We can put things in place now, not having to wait for this type of a planning process to go through.
Okay, that's fine. I would like to arrange some time in a meeting with, the council to go over some of the, protocols of, how archaeological resources are protected within this valley. Thank you very much.
Anyone else in the audience wish to comment? Questions? All right, I'll come back to commissioners, council. Any additional questions?
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Blatz?
Are staff looking for an approval of this today?
It's on our agenda.
So yeah, on the city council agenda, we will be asking for approval of the contract.
Okay. Then, Madam Mayor, I would appreciate hearing from the planning commissioners, and then on the agenda item at our meeting, we could hear from the council members.
Okay. So do the planning commissioners intend to stay with us for a while? Yes. Okay. We're about 10 minutes after 7, so I'm going to adjourn this meeting And we'll need just 5 minutes or so to restructure the council room, and then we'll go into our regular meeting. Meeting adjourned.